All right, today we're going to talk about making clipping masks to objects in Photoshop. So we're going to run through how to do that, how you would play around with setting that up, and what kind of effects you can get out of that. Now, this is one of those things that'll have a lot of different applications. You can play with it to get different effects, but we're going to go over the basics, show you how to prep a document and how you would use it. So first off here, you'll see that I have a scan that I scanned here in black and white. Now, if you want to mess with this in color or do anything like that, make sure that you go up to the top here, your top menu to Image Mode, and make sure you're in RGB or CMYK mode, wherever this is intended. Remember, RGB for screens, CMYK for print. Now that we're in RGB mode, you'll see here I already have my layer set up. I have an image here that I want to clip and fit to the background. I have an image here to work with. That's been scanned in. Now, you can grab paper textures from lots of different sources, but I recommend that you scan in some of these. You'll see here in the corners that there's some nice detail or things that are out of focus. This corner of the paper was pulled up a little bit off the scanner, so it's going to be a little softer around the edges than some of these other pieces. If you want that to not be the case, make sure your paper lays flat, put something on the back of it. But these were scanned with the scanner lid open. The reason for that is because it will make the background black, it creates high contrast, and it's much easier to pull images off of a high contrast background than it is if everything's white, if the lid was shut on the scanner. So the first thing that you're going to want to do with this is make a selection. Now there's a few ways you can do this. And depending on what you do, you're going to get different results. So number one, I could come in here to my background layer. I'll click on the lock here at the right to turn this, to unlock this layer. And then I can go to a tool like my quick selection tool. What this will allow me to do is click in this object and drag. And because it's high contrast, it's pretty quickly going to snap to everything that's white on here. I can do the same thing down here, drag on this, and it will click and drag, and it will highlight this as well. So you can see I have these two things selected. I can then come up here to select and inverse. So now everything dark is selected. I can hit delete, and then those objects are gone. Now, because of that selection being right around the edge of the paper, you'll see here that I get all of the shadow that's happening within this image. One other way that I'll show you here is we can go back to our image before we selected anything, and we can come up to select and color range. This allows me to click on a part of the paper here, and it will select that color out of the image. Now if I turn my fuzziness down here, you can see I could turn it up, and this becomes much harsher of an edge. If I turn it down, I can control how much of that paper it grabs. So I just want to get enough here where you see a little bit of a shadow gradient that's happening here. If I have that and I have my selection say OK, then you'll notice it's not going to grab all this information. So when I come up to select, invert my selection, and delete the dark background, you can start to see that there's a little bit of transparency that's happening in here. Now that might be something that you want in your image. You want some of this texture, you want these edges kind of softened. So depending on what you're going for, just make sure that your selection type matches your intent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with these soft images and show you how this works. You can now take an image that you've captured, photo, something that you've grabbed or that you're working on in another project, but you can bring an image in here, and we'll do that now by representing the top layer here as my image. So I've got this poster that I've dragged in for this one for good old KCR. Now, what I want to do in the background first is let's split these into different pieces of paper. That way I can use them independently. I'll use my selection tool, select around one of these pieces of paper, and I'll cut that out. And then I'll paste it in. so that I have two of these pieces of paper on different layers. If you're going to do multiple pieces of paper, why not use the space in the scanner and scan a bunch of these and then break them up in Photoshop instead of just doing it one by one. So we'll turn off this layer. We'll work just with the large piece of paper right now. So let's turn this on. Now to make a clipping mask, once you have your image, make sure that it's on top of whatever you want it to clip to. Make sure that the shape is directly below it. So we'll move layer 0 up here under layer 1. And then at this point, all you need to do is hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard. And when you put your mouse right in between two layers, you're going to see this clipping button, the little down arrow with a white square. Now if I click, still holding Option when this pops up, it will now apply this to the background. The image is now clipped to that piece of paper. I can still click on layer 1 where my poster is. I can move this poster around still. I can bring it down in size if I'm wanting to resize this. You'll notice here that that softened edge with the opacity still shows up. So if I were to add a layer and place it on the bottom and then draw a background here. Let's make this background a little bit darker so that we can see what those roughed edges might look like. So again, depending on your technique, what you're going for, what type of paper are you printing on, is there a background to the image? Some of these choices might make sense to bring in extra texture, some may not. But at this point, you're ready to go with this and to use this image. If you were to use this for print, the two ways that would be best to do it is to save it as a Photoshop file. So I would get rid of my background, just have my image clipped to whatever that paper was, and then I could kick this out as a Photoshop file that could be used in InDesign. The other way that I might save this is saving it as a TIFF and putting it into InDesign. For this purpose, let's go ahead and we'll output it. File save as. We'll make sure this is a Photoshop file. We'll call it KCR Tearing It Up. We're going to be good design citizens, like old Uncle Drappy taught us when he came out to visit. We're going to put those underscores in between the type of the name, save it as a Photoshop, and then we can save that out and say OK. Then that is ready now to be used in InDesign.